l'équipe de la Gambie. Puis nous avons fait des restitutions avec le staff de IRSF avant de faire l'implémentation de la plateforme génomique au niveau de notre laboratoire. Dans un premier temps, nous avons cherché à voir la corrélation entre la concentration post-PCR et le site évalué. Et nous nous sommes rendus compte que plus le CT était élevé, plus la concentration était faible. Partant de cette remarque, nous avons fixé notre seuil à un CT de 35 et nous faisons d'abord le screening de tous les échantillons positifs au SARS-CoV-2. Ensuite, par rapport à ce screening, nous faisons le screening du nouveau variant. C'est un système RT-PCR qui nous permettait de détecter d'emblée si l'échantillon en question est constitué d'une séquence qui est un nouveau variant ou non. Ensuite, si l'échantillon est positif à ce screening, nous l'intégrons directement au protocole de séquençage que nous avons mis en place à IRSF. Ensuite, nous prenons 10% des échantillons négatifs que nous intégrons pour ne pas passer à côté de nouveaux variants. Et très rapidement, nous avons eu des résultats, bien que si vous regardez dans cette figure qu'il y avait un déphasage entre le nombre de séquences et le nombre d'échantillons positifs. Mais malgré ça, IRSF est le premier institut au Sénégal qui fait plus de séquences et nous avons les séquences qui sont plus nombreuses qui sont soumises sur J7. Là, si vous regardez dans cette distribution, au cours des 3 vagues, nous remarquons qu'il y a une diversité des variants qui ont été identifiés à IRSF. Et ce que nous avons fait surtout, c'est regarder l'évolution de ces variants au cours du temps, depuis la première vague, la deuxième et la troisième vague, pour voir quels étaient les variants qui étaient impliqués dans cette évolution. Et si vous regardez cette évolution, nous voyons durant la première vague qu'il y avait moins de diversité des variants qui ont été observés. Et au cours de la deuxième vague, nous voyons nettement que c'était plutôt le variant alpha qui était prédominant. Ensuite, au cours de la troisième vague, nous voyons que c'est le variant delta avec des proportions qui pouvaient atteindre jusqu'à 100% dans nos séquences qui ont été réalisées. Et récemment, ce qui a été déterminant, c'est que nous avons remarqué qu'il y avait la circulation du variant Omicron au niveau du Sénégal et des sous-variants delta qui ont été identifiés dans les dernières séquences, surtout de ce mois. Ce que nous faisons, c'est que nous faisons une surveillance quotidienne de ces variants et nous mettons à disposition pour les autorités médicales du pays qui prendront les mesures adéquates pour faire la surveillance. Donc, le rôle de IRSF dans cette pandémie, c'est vraiment d'aider les autorités à une surveillance de la circulation des variants au Sénégal. Avec la chute de l'incidence, en plus, ce que nous faisons une surveillance chez les patients qui sont en rechute, qui ont pris des vaccins et qui sont en rechute. Et là, si vous regardez cette distribution, nous avons remarqué que tous les patients qui ont rechuté ont été infectés par le variant Delta et des sous-lignées du variant Delta. Et quand nous avons cherché à voir un peu la distribution des lignées au niveau des vaccinés et des non-vaccinés, nous avons remarqué qu'il y avait plus de diversité des lignées au niveau des patients qui ont été vaccinés que les patients qui n'ont pas reçu de vaccin. Par rapport aux mutations, par contre, on n'a pas vu une grande disparité entre les deux groupes, bien que certaines mutations sont retrouvées chez les patients qui n'ont pas été vaccinés, alors que ces mutations ne sont pas retrouvées chez les patients vaccinés. Donc aujourd'hui,
and invite Mr. Mapagi, who is a biologist at the Foundation of the Congolese for the Research Medical, whose presentation is titled Genomic Surveillance of SARS-CoV-2 Variants Circulating in Brazzaville, Republic of Congo, during the period of December 2020 to July 2021. Over to you, Mr. Mapangri.
Thank you very much for the floor given. I'm going to talk about the genomic surveillance of COVID, of SARS-CoV-2 variants circulating in Brazzaville, Republic of Congo from December 2020 to July 2021. During this presentation, we will follow this plan. The pandemic of coronavirus is going on, and the total number of cases registered around the world is 266 million of cases, and the number of deaths is 5 million, pardon. And as we can note it in all continents in the world, there is some countries that reported more cases than others, like we can see in this map of Africa. And the total number of cases in Africa is 8 million of cases confirmed, and with 244 deaths. The Republic of Congo, which is the country located in Central Africa with 5 million of inhabitants, reported its first case by the date of 14 March 2020. And now the country reported the number of 15,231 deaths. The SARS-CoV-2 virus is mutating every time and leading to the new variant. As you can see, the data reported by GIZ, there are many variants that have been circulating from the beginning of the pandemic till now. As we can see in this graph, that the most variants that have been circulating from January 2021 to November 2021 were Delta variant and Alpha variant. And in Africa, there are also the variants that were circulating in high prevalence, like Delta variant and Beta variant. Now we are also the Omicron variant that is circulating in many countries in the world. And we don't know where this variant will bring us. However, the genomic surveillance is very essential to understand the dynamic, virulence, transmissibility, pathogenesis of an infection. Thus, the main objective is to determine the prevalence and the dynamic of SARS-CoV-2 variant circulating in Brazzaville, Republic of Congo, and specifically, first to sequence and determine SARS-CoV-2 lineages of sample from asymptomatic and symptomatic participants from December 2021, from December 2020 to July 2021. And with the second objective was to determine the proportion of all detected variants in the different districts of Brazzaville where patients were come from. To achieve this objective, we used these methods. Oropharyngeal swabs were collected from asymptomatic and symptomatic, and the RT-PCR were performed by targeting S gene using alternate kit diagnostic. Samples that have the CT value under than 30 were subjected for sequencing. And for the library preparation, we used the protocol of Oxford nanopore, and the FASTQ file obtained were analyzed using the pipeline of Arctic Midnight Network. The phylogenetic tree were constructed by downloaded the sequences that have the high QC, the high quality control from GZ, and we used the MAFT software. And the phylogenetic tree and also the phylogeny geographic were constructed using respectively IQ3 and R softwares. From these methods that we use, we find these results as follows. We collected a total number of 600 swabs, from where we find 317 positive samples that were positive by RT-PCR, and then 182 samples were of the CT value under than 30, and the whole genome sequences were found from 171 samples. And from these 171 world genome that we get from this study, the lineages were assigned, from where we find that there are three main variants that have been circulating during the period of the study, that we found B1 214.2, 14.1, and also B1 620 that have been circulating in the high prevalence in our country. We found also for the first time in the country the circulation of alpha and beta variants. As you can see in this graph, we detected a total number of 15 variants from December 2020 to July 2021. And we found that the most prevalence that we found the most variants have been circulating by the month of December to February, that we find the most variants that have been circulating in our country. And also this map shows us that the district of Potopoto, according to the residence play districts that were coming from our participants, Potopoto and Bakongo show us the diversity genetic of variants, where we can say that these two districts represent the focal point of the diversity of SARS-CoV-2 in our country. This graph shows us the curve of different waves that we find in the country from 2020 to 2021. And the main point we can note for this study is that the detection of 15 different variants, and most of these variants were B1 214.1, B1 214.2 and B1 620. That's where corresponding to the second wave in our country. We find, of course, B117, which is Alpha variant, and also Delta variant, but no wave was attributed to these two variants. And at the later after our study, Delta wave occurred by the month of September and October 2021 after our study. This study was supported by our partner, and we acknowledge them for supporting our study. Thank you very much for following us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mapangu, for such a great presentation coming in from the Republic of Congo. I would just like to say to our participants who are listening in to please ask any questions on the chat. These will be translated to the various speakers at the end of the session. Next, we have Dr. Nicholas Bosa, a scientist from the Medical Research Council, or the Uganda Virus Research Institute, and London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, Uganda Research Unit, who will be presenting on the genomic surveillance of SARS-CoV-2 in Uganda, which shows rapid replacements of the variants in 2021. Over to you, Dr. Bosa.
Thank you very much, moderator. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone, and to all those who are joining us virtually. So I'll start by giving a brief background to the work. We all know that timely genomic surveillance is quite important in monitoring circulating new SARS-CoV-2 variants. And the Uganda Virus Research Institute and its partner, the Medical Research Council, contribute to Uganda's SARS-CoV response by identifying circulating SARS-CoV-2 variants and those that have emerged. And as part of the routine national genomic surveillance, we identified circulating variants between the period of June to August 2021, but also analyzed the trends of SARS-CoV-2 lineages over time. So before I proceed, I want to just briefly talk about the capacity for SARS-CoV-2 genomics at the Uganda Virus Research Institute. So we do have quite a number of next generation sequencing platforms. At the Institute, we have 2 Illumina MiSeq platforms with the capacity to generate 96 to 192 genomes per week. We also have several MinIO next generation sequencing platforms with the capacity to generate 25 to 40 genomes per week. In terms of the bioinformatics infrastructure, we do have the Uganda Medical Informatics Center, which is a high performance computing cluster that is located at the Uganda Virus Research Institute in Entebbe. And just to put its computing power into perspective, this cluster has approximately 2,000 CPU cores or processors and about 500 terabytes of high performance analytical disk space. So in Uganda, we've had 2 waves of COVID-19. The first wave occurred between December 2020 and January 2021. And in that first wave, we saw that the A.23 and A.23.1 SARS-CoV-2 variants were the dominant ones. The second wave happened between May 2021 and July 2021. And in the second wave, we saw that the Delta variant was the dominant one. So this graph here shows the distribution of SARS-CoV two lineages over time in Uganda. And the data analyzed here are SARS-CoV-2 sequences that have been deposited in the GSAID database and are publicly available. So we can see from the graph that since the start of the epidemic, there has been a replacement of variants over time. We can see that in the yellow shaded area we had at the start, we had a mixture or a blend of SARS-CoV variants and lineages. And as we went further on, in 2021, we had the 8.23 and 8.23.1 as shown in the blue shaded area. And we can see in the final part of the graph, shaded red, that we now have the Delta as the dominant variant. So in the study presented here, 107 samples were collected between June to August 2021. These samples are tested positive on RT-PCR and had CT values less than 26. So these samples were sequenced mostly using the Illumina MiSeq platform, but some of them were sequenced using the MinION sequencer. So for the MiSeq deep sequence reads, we did the assembly using the Genome Detective software. But for the Oxford Nanopore deep sequence reads, we used the NanoPolish pipeline, which we adapted from the ATIC network protocol. We also use NextClad to do quality control of the sequence data, but also to do the CLAD assignment. And we additionally use the Genius program to do quality checks. And for the lineage analysis, we used the popular Pangolin program. So this is a graph showing the results from the analysis. 102 out of the 107 genomes were of the Delta variant, which is a variant of concern, as we all know. And we can see that from this plot that the Delta accounted for more than 95% of all the variants. So in conclusion, I can say that SARS-CoV-2 sequences that have been deposited in GSAID from Uganda as of 12th December 2021, and in total there are 820 genomes, they do show a rapid replacement of variants over time. So 107 samples that were genotyped, like I showed in the results, showed that the Delta lineage and its sublineages were the dominant variants. However, recently, 7 cases of the Omicron variant have been reported in Uganda from travelers arriving through the international airport in Uganda. And the issue of near real-time genomic surveillance really cannot be overemphasized, as this is critical in keeping track of what is circulating or any new variants that emerge. However, this study was not without limitation. A major limitation was the suboptimal sampling resulting from funding challenges. And going forward, the aim is really to develop future effective sampling frames. So I would like to acknowledge everyone on that slide, scientists who have been involved in this work from the Medical Research Council, from the Uganda Virus Research Institute, the Uganda Ministry of Health, colleagues from the Central Public Health Laboratories, our funders, Africa CDC, the Global Fund, our collaborators from CRISP, and all the other funders that are listed on this slide. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mbosa, for a great presentation coming in from Uganda, showing us rapid replacement of the variants. I'm currently jotting down my questions to ask you all later on, and I hope also our participants who are watching and listening to the great work you are doing the same. If you have any questions, please do put them on the chat to help our technical team to move them to us so that we can be able to ask your question to the presenters. Next up, we have Dr. Gitinji, who is a bioinformatician at the Kemri Wellcome Trust Research Program, whose presentation is titled "The Genomic Surveillance of SARS-CoV-2 in Kenya from a period of March 2020 to October 2021. Over to you, Dr. Kidinji. Dr. Kindiji, if you're speaking, you're currently on mute. So please unmute your mic.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much. Again, good evening, good afternoon from wherever you're listening from and following these proceedings. My name is Dr. George Kidinji. I'm based at the Kemri Wellcome Trust Research Program in Kenya, and I'm going to talk about genomic surveillance of SARS-CoV-2 in Kenya from the beginning of the epidemic to just about October-November period. So my previous individuals have talked about the importance of genomic surveillance and more important for Kenya. So the first case of SARS-CoV-2 in Kenya was confirmed on 12th of March in 2020, and that followed very strict guidelines by the government and by the ministry that involved restriction of movement as well as closure of public places in order to stem and prevent further introductions, and also involved suspension of flights into and out of the country. And Kenya so far has experienced just about 256,000 confirmed cases and about 5,400 confirmed deaths. But we think this may be an underestimate based on serological surveillance cases that have indicated that up to just about the beginning of this year, over 50% of individuals may have already been exposed. And from our modeling surveillance, just showing that the attack rate may well have been over 80% by July, August, and that when we experience the third and the fourth waves. And therefore, overall, Kenya is not unique in terms of vaccination coverage, and we see that, like many other countries, vaccination is still a challenge, and therefore that puts an emphasis on genomic surveillance. So overall, at the Kemri Wellcome Trust, we've set up a genomics surveillance framework that we could think about in 4 parts. One is a sample referral network that is reaching out through the MOH and the government and national public health laboratories, sending samples to us, as well as county hospitals and regional private hospitals that send samples, positive samples for genome sequencing, as well as the coast countries that send samples through the rapid deployment or response teams. And we also leverage on a CLIFI demographic surveillance system that have been set up for quite a long time, over 25 years, to again look at genomic surveillance and have particular studies. One of the interesting ones is a household study that is looking at SARS-CoV-2 surveillance and infections within households. The other important aspect is actually samples coming in to us from regional countries, and this again is through engagement with regional bodies like Africa CDC and WHO Afro. So in terms of sequencing infrastructure, we have 2 major platforms, that's an Illumina MySeq platform, as well as the NanoPo platform. And the NanoPo platform is the backbone of most of our genomic surveillance. We've got about 4 handheld devices running 96 samples each, MK1C and Agridion with a capacity for sequencing over 400 samples in a single run. So all in total, we got a capacity of over 700 samples in a week. But again, there are limitations in terms of human capacity and some of the bottlenecks in the sequencing pipeline. And we got a HPC system that is the backbone of our storage and computing and infrastructure. And more important, enable a human resource capacity of bioinformaticians and laboratory research officers that take all the data, manage them, and produce all the reports that then feed into policy bodies through the Kenyan Ministry of Health, and as well as the regional bodies, the Africa CDC, WHO, Afro, and then sharing our global data with the rest of the world. And that platform has been in development since we detected this, but it largely actually relies on existing infrastructure that has been set up at the Kemri Wellcome Trust and that we took advantage of, but we've expanded it quite substantially, and it allowed us very early on at the beginning to really look at how SARS-CoV-2 got into the country. And I got a cartoon representation of what we think may have happened, where individuals, presumably asymptomatic individuals, got into the country, seeded community transmission. And following MOH guidelines, we saw testing at the border points, either individual getting turned off or quarantined at the border facilities, but also individuals who tested negative getting into the country or going into quarantine centers. And overall, our phylogenetic work, we can see that we are able to track the effectiveness of this system. And what it was able to do was that it was able to delay infections and community spread, as we saw within the first wave, but it did not necessarily stop community infections and community transmission, particularly when individuals are asymptomatic and get detected at the border. Again, in terms of lineages and introductions, we saw a number of lineages getting in, but only the B1 and B11 lineages seeding community transmission. So again, taking advantage of this, we've extended our genome surveillance across multiple counties, and this plot here is just showing a sort of a scatter plot of the number of genomes relative to the counties and the number of cases, again showing sort of an unevenness of the genome coverage, and that we still need to do a lot more. But still, using our system, we're able to track persistence of particular lineages over time, as well as detect introduction of new lineages, and more so variants of concern, as illustrated in this plot here, where we see sort of the large 4 waves and lineage persistence and replacement over time. So for example, we see the first wave and the second wave were largely dominated by ancestral lineages, and the third and fourth wave were largely dominated by variants of concern. And of particular importance is the fourth wave that saw introduction of the Delta variant, and then the Delta variant quickly replaced nearly all the previous lineages and seeded that large infection and track. So again, based on phylogenetic clustering, particularly of the VOCs, we're able to track the introductions. But what is also interesting is that our genomic coverage was able to see and estimate the number of introductions over time, but as well as we can see that we're able to receive, or Kenya was able to see nearly the extent, a large extent of diversity of the alpha lineage, as well as the delta lineage. But then we see particular clusters, meaning that these were introductions that went on to seed large scale infections across the country. And more importantly, just looking at the Delta variants, which have persisted for quite a while, indeed, we see what may be consistent with lineages that may be particular to the country. And again, we can see just looking at within countries and geographical regions, how that clustering has persisted over time. So in terms of impact, our genomic surveillance system has been able to inform public health and inform decision-making. Again, our capacity has been shared with the global community and been able to show our data, but also really carry out important studies across the continent showing the persistence of SARS-CoV-2 and the movement and transmission across the continent. And again, is the training capacity building that we've conducted in-house based on our experience, and well now starting to collaborate with with global bodies and more experienced bodies to roll out training across the country and across the continent. And again, the regional support largely from Africa CDC and WHO Afro are supporting a number of countries within the Horn of Africa, that's Ethiopia, Comoros, Seychelles, Sudan, and Eswatini, and we are still more than happy to continue that role and support as many countries as possible. So coming to the end of my talk, I would like to appreciate and acknowledge our funders, particularly Africa CDC, TIBA, who afforded us sort of the startup package for genomic surveillance, the Wellcome Trust, the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, FCDO, the NIHR, on whom previous infrastructure we built our genome sequencing, KEMRI, which is my institute, and the Ministry of Health, as well as individuals that are listed here that's played a really central role in terms of setting up this system, and more important, our testing teams and our county rapid response teams. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kitinji, for such an informative presentation. Without taking too much time, I would like to call on Dr. Ndondo, who is the Chief Molecular Bioengineer at the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, whose presentation is titled Tracking SARS-CoV-2 Variants and Strains, an overview of Nigeria CDC's first 596 sequences in November 2021. Over to you, Dr. Ndondo. Dr. Ndondo, please unmute yourself. You're on mute. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. So I'm talking about tracking SARS-CoV-2 variants and strain in Nigeria, which is an overview of the first 596 sequences submitted to GSAID from the Nigerian Center for Disease Control. So far,
Dr. Sorry to disturb you. Can you put your presentation to full screen, please? Thank you.
Yeah, so far, the COVID-19 was detected in Nigeria on 27th February. As of today, Nigeria has recorded a total of over 217,000 cases. And out of that, about 2,983 mortality resulted from it. And my presentation so far will be talking about a subset of the sequences we have in GSAID. So Nigeria, as of today, has over 3,795 genomes in GSAID. So of which 791, about 20% of the total genome in GSAID from Nigerian Center for Disease Control National Reference Lab. And we will not be talking about the whole 791, we'll be concentrating on the first 596. And it's also important to note that the Nigerian Center for Disease Control through NRL discovered also recently about 11 Omicron have been deposited to GSAID from this same lab. So the method we use for our analysis, we normally collect sample, receive sample of both nasal and oropharyngeal swab. Up to 800 of them have been received for this. And we have the ones that meet the required threshold of CT, positive samples that meet our less than 27 CT threshold. We pass them through viral extraction. And then we prepare cDNA and do multiplex PCR, and then we now continue our library prep. In our lab, we use two platforms. We use Oxford Nanopore Mini-ion, which we have 3 units of that in our lab. And then we now recently also received an Illumina MySeq, which have been the bedrock of some of the sequences we have done lately. But most of the sequences we are discussing were generated using these Mini-ion sequences. And then we follow the Arctic primers. And then for the MySeq, we also use NebNest Saskoff-2 FS library kits. We also use Illumina own library preparation kits. And also we use COVID-seq for the later work we have done so far. So thereafter, we do our analysis using the established Arctic bioinformatic pipelines, and we assemble using the nanopolish. And then for the Illumina work, we run our system, we run it using the base space, from the base space, and then do our output using the Dragon COVID lineage app on the base space. And then the trees are generated using IQ3, and we illustrate output using the R program. And then for lineage assignments and for quality control of the sequences, we also do use a Nextclade. Prior to submitting to Nextclade GSAID, we run it through Nextclade, and we also use a pangolin for lineage assignments. And thereafter, quality genomes are uploaded to GSAID for visualization for other people to access. So far, the total of 596 sequences in GSAID, we have majority of the data being Delta, which is 321, about 53% of the genome. And then Alpha variant, we detected about 6 of them, 1%. And then Eta, which dominated our second wave, about 88% in genomes, and about 14%. So we also have this unique B11318 variant under monitoring that carries this E4A4K mutation and P681 mutation, which is found in the furin cleavage site. We have it about 20, which is 3.3%. Then we have other lineage, the L3 lineage, the so-called Nigerian lineage, which is also a sublineage of B1110. We have it, sorry. So this has this mutation D614G and L452R and Y1155 mutation, which actually we have found so much in the first wave. Thank you. So that occupies about 93%, that's 15.6% of what we have. About 68, about 11.4% were of lineage that were not assigned. So far, we are now looking at the distribution of the variants over the time within these 596 sequences. So you can look at that Nigeria actually we can identify 3 clear waves of this virus. The first one was between April and September of 2020, which were driven by this D614G, then L452R, and then Y1155 mutation. Sorry. So, but when you look between October to March, we also have another wave of the virus, which is dominated by this Delta variant, the Eta variant, the so-called Nigerian UK variant, which carries the E4A4K mutation. You can see them dominating the second wave. And it was the main variant that drove the second wave. You can see some alpha variant there. See alpha variants also in that. But then when you look at between July to November, you can see a lot of, from this study up to the November, we saw another wave, a third wave. You can see preponderance of the Delta variant. They are dominating the third wave. And then you can see replacement of this Eta variant by the Delta variant, which drove the third wave. Then from our tree here, you can still see these unique clusters. You can see from here, where you see the first wave, when you have most of the parent lineages dominating, particularly the L3 lineage and the B1110 lineage, which dominated the first wave and led by the D614G mutation. And then you come here again, you see again the second wave of the variants driven by Delta in green in the tree. And then you can see wider wave we're seeing on the third wave, completely driven by the Delta variant. Then when you also look at the distribution based on the states of the Federation, we can see that Delta dominated particularly a state in Nigeria, Akwa Ibom. We noticed increased hospitalization and transmission. So when we sequenced, we saw that quite a lot of these people came down with a Delta. That was even what really marked the wave we saw. And you can see in the federal capital where NRL is located, you still see preponderance of Delta variant. And then you can also see the Eta variant at the highest continues to be the Delta variant, followed by the Eta variant. So the Alpha were not so much, but they were also found in the FCT. Then another state also in Kwara, because we did some focused work in Ilorin, we saw quite a lot of Delta variants in that. On the map also shows where you have distribution of this. Then in terms of lineage, you can see that we have quite a lot of AY36, the so-called Nigerian lineage of Delta dominating, followed again by the Eta variant. And then you have followed by the Eta variant, and then which is the B1525, and then the other lineage of Delta. And then you can see L3 variant, which is also the so-called Nigerian lineage. We saw them also dominating in this. Then we can also, if you look on the side again, you see distribution among age group. You will see that we saw more of this Delta. You can see that we have more from the age group between 21 to 30. They are the ones that we have most of these variants, apparently because they were coming for testing, and then you can still see the domination of Delta variant. You can see the Eta variant also there. So these are the group that were mostly tested, and you can see we didn't see much Alpha in them, but we saw a lot of this Delta in this group. So far, from our work, we have shown that detected two variants of concern, Alpha and Delta, variants under a monitoring, Eta and B1318, which is a predominant variant that started from Nigeria and spread through West Africa. We saw quite a lot of it, and it looks very similar to what we have in the Eta as well as also in the Beta variant. So, and we also saw 10 cases of vaccine breakout infection from this A3136, about 7 of them, and 1 from AY variant, and then we also saw 2 from Eta. We also saw cases of reinfection in this. So it's very important to know that the genomic surveillance continues to help to advance public health advisory, and it will continue to evolve as we continue to sequence more. It will help to guide our detection. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to mention that, in conclusion, the rate of emergence of the new variant will require continuous vigilance, as when we think we're resting, another one will come up. So that was the case of Omicron. We are seeing it all with Delta, then this one just came in, and fortunately we're able to bring down. We increase capacity, we will continue to do. Africa will be in a better position. Thank you so much for the time. These are my partners. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ndondo, for such a great presentation coming in from Nigeria. Now we are moving to our question and answer session. As previously indicated, please do feel welcome to put your questions on the chat. You will find that on the right-hand side of the platform. Basically, your videos this side, your chats that side, you'll see those in those icons. Please feel free to ask any questions that you'd like to ask. Dr. Ndondo, if you could close your screen, take down your screen so that we can see all the other presenters. That will be appreciated so we can go to question and answers. So I have two general questions while we wait for questions to come in from the floor. And these questions are for all of our speakers. So in terms of sample collection, because especially for Uganda, you see a rapid replacement of your variants. And I'm really curious to know why that is. And so from each of the presenters, I would like to understand your sample collection. How many were your locally transmitted cases? And how many were your possible travelers who had travel history? So I could start with the person that I'm seeing on the floor, Dr. Bosa, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you for that question. So in Uganda, we've been sampling mostly, at least at the start of the epidemic, mostly from points of entry. That is from the airports and from the borders that neighbor Uganda. So a lot of the earlier samples were taken from those areas. But as we progressed during the epidemic, we saw an increase in sampling from the communities. However, initially we did focus on sampling regions in Uganda where there was suspected high transmission of COVID-19. However, we do realize that the sampling going forward has to be done more representatively. So in the future, we are looking at sampling even the low transmission areas. However, we do know that we've seen the rapid replacement of variants over time. And it could be because of how the virus was evolving. And of course, this could have been impacted by the way we are sampling. And that is why one of the, to have this done more representatively and see what the picture will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bosa. Dr. Kidinji, if you'd like to answer the same question, feel free.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's an important question. And in Kenya, and I think in pretty much most other places, we do realize that there is a challenge when it comes to genome sequencing for low viral load samples. So these are samples that we present with high CT. And again, we've seen a lot of asymptomatic cases, particularly at the beginning of the epidemic in Kenya. And so in Kenya, for example, we've got quite a large, definitely has an impact, on what you see. And again, the genomic surveillance does actually depend partly on the research question. And for us, what you want to do is the ability to identify variants of concern or variants that may have a transmission advantage. And sometimes to do that, you really need to be consistent with your sampling and not necessarily sometimes have a really large catchment area. So if you've got a consistent sampling machinery or system, even with between 50 to 100 samples, you will still be able to detect new introductions, new lineages, and track their persistence over time. So again, we in sort of a low resource setting, we've had our challenges, and I can bear witness most of my colleagues here, when it comes down to getting the reagents, setting up the systems, repeating experiments, and the other important thing is the line list and the nitty-gritty bit about going to the field, taking a nasal swab, putting it in VTM, transporting it. So a lot of challenges, and that will bias your sampling criteria. The other important thing is actually is that not a lot of African countries were exposed to epidemic of this scale. And what is interesting, I think, and many thanks to Africa CDC and regional bodies in trying to, push and elevate nearly all the countries to support genomic surveillance. I think if you look at upon the introduction of sort of the variants of concern, we've seen a rapid capacity in genome sequencing. For example, in Kenya, we've seen now a lot more centers, within my institute sequencing, and a lot more coming on board, so that then we can get a lot more representation. So I did show a scatter plot, and again, sampling and sequencing will also be biased into, towards the more populous regions or areas that have a lot more greater infrastructural capacity. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but it's actually quite an important question, and I don't think it has a one answer to it. But thank you.
And thank you so much, Dr. Kindije, because that leads to my next question. In fact, because I looked at Dr. Ndondo's presentation, and he's talking about less than 1,000 samples that they were looking at. And I mean, Nigeria is a huge population. And so it would be really interesting to hear those challenges in terms of your capacity and infrastructure that goes towards the samples that you actually select. Because now, as we are to understand, Uganda specifically looked at point of entry, which is possibly the reason why they are seeing rapid replacement of the cases or samples per se. So Dr. Ndondo, if I can put you on the spot, my question would be, what are those challenges that you are facing in Nigeria, besides the ones that Dr. Kindije has actually mentioned, that hinder you actually sampling a bit more samples? So first off, what was your sample collection protocol, as well as what are the challenges that you are facing?
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a very good question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah,
so like initially, our target was to really, when we started sequencing, our own sequencing, I'm just not talking about the whole Nigerian sequencing. We have over 3,000 sequences for Nigeria. I'm only concentrating for this presentation on the sequences for the National Reference Lab of NCDC. So now we initially started sequencing just to track transmission dynamics in our lab, you understand. But then we had to when we started getting the alpha variant, the so-called UK variant, and the beta variant, the South African variant, there was a directive that travelers, there will be increased surveillance at the point of entry, just to regulate the inbound, understand to prevent introduction of these variants. So we were focusing more on travelers at the beginning, and again, when most people also were not testing on normally, so because you must sequence positive samples, you're not going to sequence the negative samples, and the samples you're going to sequence will also meet a specific threshold that will be able to be assembled. So the most people that were being tested were people who are traveling, either they are outbound and they're inbound, coming down. They are mandated to take this test. So that was where we had more sample from the travelers, and then some other places, the state public health labs, where we saw spike in infection. We also requested them to send us their positive samples. So one of the challenges we have is to increase the throughput. We have like the machine, we have MySic, we have also the nanopore, and hence to more manpower to also help to increase that. That's a challenge. But the main challenge is the sampling, the quality of the sample we receive, and the CT, because many of them sometimes are at very high CTs, you are not able to assemble them, and then it doesn't give you good quality. So that says the challenge we have in our own side. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ndondo. Dr. Padal, do you have any comments related to this sample collection, as well as your challenges in terms of capacity? Dr. Abdul? If you can hear me, you're currently muted. Okay, so let's then move on to the next question that I had, which was from the Republic of Congo. Mr. Mabapangu, you said you also tested asymptomatic cases in your study. And I'm quite curious as to how you identify those. Now, listening to the challenges that have been presented to us, low CT values, how and what, yeah. So take us through that. What were your challenges? How did you identify your asymptomatic cases? What did you define as your asymptomatic cases and moving forward? Because I think this is one of the biggest things in Africa, because probably we are seeing a lot of asymptomatic cases. And so it will be really interesting to hear from you how you went through that. Okay,
thank you very much for the question. For the symptomatic cases that we identify, asymptomatic cases we identified, for example, from travelers, those who decide, for example, to leave the country, and those who come to do the test voluntarily. So from that, we can identify the asymptomatic cases and detect the SARS-CoV-2 infection from this population. Yeah.
So if I'm to understand, your sample size is based on the travelers who were asymptomatic, however tested positive for SARS-CoV-2.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
As well as you had volunteer people volunteering to test. Can you please explain, what do you mean? People just came in to just get tested regardless?
Yes, because there are some people that will want to know they study about COVID-19, and if there is, for example, a case in a center, we test all the contact cases. Yeah. That's what we define as the asymptomatic case in the situation of our study. Yeah.
Good. So we have a question from the floor, and I am to understand most of you are actually within the network under the Pathogen Genomics Institute. And essentially, Mr. or Miss Akanbi is asking, could the logistics around sample shipments to sequencing labs be another problem in Africa? And anyone is open to actually take that on.
Please, could you repeat the question?
I'll repeat the question, but I see Dr. Kindiji's hand is up. The question is, could the logistics around the sample shipping of the samples to the sequencing labs be another problem in Africa? So let's hear Dr. Kindiji, and then Dr. Ndondo, you are welcome to also answer.
Thank you very much. And I think that's quite an important one. Because, the logistics for shipping, it's not very obvious. First of all, you got countries with different systems and different policies. And also, you got to fill in the MTA forms, the material transfer agreement forms, as well as there may be other issues between countries. And therefore, those challenges, can compound your ability to sequence. And as we all know, particularly genomic surveillance and sequencing is very important, and it's very useful if it's near real time. And if you've got about 5 weeks or 3 weeks lag, then you really are talking about retrospective sampling. And by the time you realize or denote the lineages that are circulating, it may be too late. And therefore, you want to bring a sequencing much closer, and ideally every country will be sequencing and have that capacity. And I'm glad there are efforts towards that. But in the meantime, I think from our experience as a sort of a regional sequencing hub, we've really benefited from the logistics and going on within the Africa CDC to then ship those samples. And therefore, again, when you're a small lab, you tend to be more on the technical side of things. Once the sample gets in, what do you do? And then the other bit of the logistics, it's best taken care of by sort of the specialist body, as well as the logistics team. So indeed, to answer your question, I think logistics and sample transfer between countries is indeed a delay, and that might see delays in terms of what gets detected. Therefore, you want to really bring that to near real time as possible, but still quite a challenge. Over.
Thanks, Lukidiji. Dr. Ndonda?
Yes, thank you. Actually, logistics for shipment of samples to sequencing lab will actually pose a lot of problem. It's also like a rate limiting step. And I'm glad that African CDC have been working to ease this method of trying to reduce the logistics, make it easier for samples to get to the sequencing lab. I know there's a particular country where I've been waiting to have their samples sequenced, and they're stopped by the logistics of getting those samples across to us, though African CDC have been trying to engage to get it. So it will be better to see how to make sure that things are easier, because just like George just said, it's better to have those samples quickly, because the earlier we sequence, the more real time we're able to detect variants. Thank you.
Very good point from both of you. Any one other of those speakers would like to actually say something around this issue? Okay, so we have another question from Shidera Mecca. And I think this is thinking out of the box, all the challenges that we face in terms of data transfer, data sharing. And she or he is asking, how can we use blockchain technology for better knowledge transferal and data collection? And I remember when we went to assess some of the NGS labs in Africa, UVRI, you had to carry external drives to move your data from one point to the other. So how can we use the latest technologies such as blockchain technology to have knowledge sharing as well as data collection? Dr. Bosa, I'm going to allow you to answer that.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, I do think that those challenges might be inevitable in many settings in Africa as related to data sharing, even generating the data itself, data storage. Servers can be costly, computing time could be costly. But we've also come a long way from the UVRI, and we have set up the UMIC cluster that I talked about that has really facilitated the analysis of big data. We are very thankful for that. It's now possible to send your jobs to the cluster to have the analysis done in a timely manner. There is sufficient storage. We can easily transfer data of the results that are generated. However, we also do realize that computing time could be costly, so it is something that has to be factored in or budgeted for within the bigger overall plan as it relates to genomic surveillance.
Thank you, Dr. Bosa. Anyone with ideas of how do we use blockchain technology in terms of data transfer?
Yeah, wow. Yeah, quite an interesting one, and definitely I think something that a lot of people have thought about, had that within sort of the broader bioinformatics. But I think the key thing before you go to blockchain, and I would like maybe to hear, I would have loved to hear more from the speaker on how he thinks or she thinks that blockchain can be used. I think you got to solve the real, basic problems. For example, just storage. For example, the technologies that we're working with will generate terabytes of data, and sometimes the cost of generating data is much lower than the cost of storing those data. And blockchain is really good when it comes to decentralized sort of auditing system. And I'm not sure. I would love to see, when we come, to using that technology, and it's become, really great in finance, and maybe there may be use for it. But at the moment, I'm not sure how blockchain would elevate some of the policy issues and epidemiological issues right close to the ground on sampling and getting accurate genomes and then sequencing and storing them. Often, a genome sequence would just be a text file, less than 5 KB, depending on the size of the genome you're looking at, and you can compress those files and just share them. And we got GSAID, for example, and NCBI and other data repositories to store those data. But nonetheless, we'd love to hear maybe from them how they think the blockchain will be of use. At the moment, I'm a little bit, I would love to hear more. Yeah, over.
Yeah, definitely. In public health, we have time of going through to identifying other ways outside to what the norm is. And it brings in a whole lot of other policy issues as well. I heard a voice. I think, was it Dr. Bosa or was it someone else?
Yes.
No, Dr. Ndondo, please.
Yes. So I'm thinking that it's always also very nice to think about innovative ways of getting our work done better. I know it may not be limited to blockchain, but every other method that Africa will invest heavily in building infrastructure, good clusters, and high performance computing that can help us to really manage our data, share them securely, and all that will be something that worthwhile looking into. So we will continue to invest. It's expensive, but it's what's involving making the expenses on, so that you can be sure that data are secured, and we are also sure that they are also stored in a robust way that cannot bring about loss of data. Thank you.
Because data security is a very important factor, especially when you are using other people's samples, especially with DNA. I haven't heard from Dr. Padan as well as Mapangui. Would you like to chime into the conversation, either be about capacity, sample collection, any challenges that you face that you feel as Africa CDC and other partners can help you address and support you with? So, Dr. Mapungi?
Yes, thank you. Of course, we have challenges in our country here about, for example, the reagents. We have sometimes we have sample to sequence, but no, we don't have reagents in our country. It's very difficult for us to get these reagents, and the logistic management. It's very difficult. So if Africa CDC can help us to provide maybe reagents for sequencing, it will help. It will be helpful for us. Yeah, and also the samples that we get is only for the city, the capital of city, and we have. Also difficult for the logistic to get the sample in the region inside of our country. So that is also the difficulties that we have in our country to get sample. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Mapangi. Dr. Padan, can you hear us? I hope you can still hear us and you're still online. So I think we've lost Dr. Padan. So I think just to close off, as we do not have any other questions, and we would appreciate if we have any other questions on the chat to please ask us. We still have about 9 more minutes left in the session. So please do feel free to ask any questions. As you see, we have a very robust panel who are very informed in terms of genomic surveillance. So please do feel free to ask a bit more questions in terms of how they can better support you as well. How do you get into the PGI Institute network? All those things, I'm sure Dr. Kindiji, Dr. Bosa, Dr. Ndodo are more than open to actually share that information with you. One key thing that we're hearing definitely from the panel is they are doing what we call as your sample collection is basically the kind of sample collection that supports in using the resources in the best way you can. And the best way is going through point of entry sample collection. We hope to see this expanding to actually fully understanding the overall picture of SARS-CoV-2 within the region in Africa, and really understanding essentially what is happening in Africa. Why aren't we as affected as the rest of the world as we are seeing in terms of the reported cases? We've sequenced more than 50,000 samples, but I'm sure we can do a bit more if we build our networks and build the support that is necessary to support each other. Building capacity is definitely one of the key things within Africa that is needed in terms of genome sequencing. Training, and I know Africa CDC, the Pathogen Genome Institute has been providing a lot of training within the member states. And I would suggest that any of the panels or even within the participants listening in, if they would need any support around that area, to please reach out to Africa CDC, and so that we can try and see how we can better support you. Otherwise, I would like to thank all of our speakers today for great presentations, as well as such rich, informative data that's coming in from Africa, which makes me very excited, because I remember in 2018, early 2018, we were running around across Africa trying to assess which countries actually had the capacity to actually do genomic sequencing. And now here we are, and we are seeing countries from all over Africa actually giving us their data and seeing what's going on in the country and able to answer that by themselves. And so thank you very much to our speakers for their time. I'd like to thank also our participants who are currently listening in. I am told that we had over 250 participants listening in. So thank you very much also for joining in to the great discussion. Tomorrow, the CPHIA conference continues. So please do come back and listen into the great sessions that will be ongoing tomorrow as well as Wednesday. We also have side events that are also ongoing. If you go into the platform, you'll get all the information, the times, and what various side events you can actually attend to. Once again, thank you everyone, and have a good evening and a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.